Hello and welcome back to BayBrothers. Today we're going to be reviewing, with spoilers, one of the most anticipated superhero movies of 2025, Superman. Superman is our favorite superhero on this channel, and we had big expectations when we heard the Superman movie was going to be directed by James Gunn. It was going to be kickstarting a whole new DC universe, which really needed a do-over with a much better overall planning and execution. As we got closer to the movie, as we started seeing visuals and trailers, honestly, we were a little disappointed as it was not really exciting us or hyping us for the movie. It was all too generic and probably only the controversial parts of the movie, like the way Superman's suit looked or Superman really looking out of character in certain moments of the trailer, were talked about. Nothing really more. But of course, we adjusted our expectations and went into the theater still pretty hopeful. However, I gotta say that this Superman movie leaves a little to be desired. It's not a horrible movie by any stretch of imagination, but as a Superman movie that is supposed to kickstart a new DC universe, the best I can say is unfortunately mediocre. This movie really doesn't take itself seriously, and I think that is the root of the problem. No one takes Superman seriously in this movie. He has no gravitas, he has no effect left on the people who he talks to. And honestly, he doesn't look like a leader. He doesn't have the charisma, and he doesn't leave a lasting impression on anyone. Yes, he's a good man, he wants to save people, that is definitely the core of who Superman is, but maybe he's a little too goofy, and when you don't take your main character of a universe that you're just creating seriously, then you have serious problems. There are positives and negatives that we can talk about. Probably the best thing about the movie are the visuals. I mean, it has a massive budget, this movie. They reported as about $210 million. The tax documents say about over $300 million. So you would expect good visuals. The casting was pretty much on point, like 90% of the casting is pretty good. And I can say the actors themselves, with the material they have, do a very good job. I don't think David Cornsweet fills the role as much as Christopher Reeve or a Henry Cavill, but that's probably because of the material he's given, not because of his acting ability. I really like Lois Lane, her casting is awesome, and I think she acts perfectly in this movie as well. I can say the same thing about Jimmy and even Lex. I was a little skeptical about the casting of Nicholas Hoult as Lex, because his previous roles aren't really super villain, super smart, evil, calculating type. I mean, that's what he's supposed to be, at least. Lex is a little different to his usual attributes in this movie, but I think Nicholas Hoult really pulls it off. The Justice Gang is also another positive. I really did like Mr. Terrific. I think Guy Gardner, even though he has a little time to shine, does a brilliant job. Nathan Fillion is always delivering amazing performances, and honestly, seeing him as a Green Lantern is kind of rewarding, considering that he was always the fan cast for Hal Jordan over the years. Maybe he got a little too old for the character, although Kyle Chandler is also kind of older. But yeah, at least seeing him as a Green Lantern is again very rewarding. And finally, Metamorpho. He looks pretty good, his design and makeup, and he's arguably the only character that is influenced positively by Superman. Not in a way I would expect. I mean, he's blackmailed by Lex to control Superman, and then he reacts when Lex kills a man that Superman cares for. It's probably that action that turns Metamorpho, not necessarily Superman or Superman's reaction to the murder. So it's not exactly what I want to see as Superman's effects on people, but it's definitely something. Finally, the bright, the optimistic and hopeful nature of the world around Superman is more present. It is certainly not on the level I hoped, because humor and bright colors aren't enough to give that to the audience. But at least Superman is optimistic, and for future projects, this can be translated and improved. There's two things I despised about the movie. First of all, the soundtrack, or the score of the movie, kind of both. I want to start by saying I like what James Gunn did with the Guardians of the Galaxy. The soundtrack idea was awesome. It fit perfectly into the narrative of the story because the soundtrack was a part of Star-Lord Peter Quill's character. But when you just play music on the background in a what is supposed to be an epic superhero movie, I don't think songs give the same vibes. It was creative 10 years ago, now I think it's just a bit too repetitive, and I think it's taking away from the potential of the movie. how epic it should be. Second, the score is just the same as the original Superman movie. It's changed a little bit. For me personally, big movies like this should have their own soundtrack. Yes, the Avengers theme is extremely popular, extremely cool, but in like 50 years, they're doing an absolutely new Avengers movie with a new cast. It should have its own score. It should have its own theme because it should be unique to that. You're not just trying to recreate the past here. You're not just trying to make money off of the past. You need to make it your own, and modernizing old themes takes that away. Other than that, the second big negative for me is crypto. And I say crypto specifically because I think it represents everything wrong about this movie. When I say the movie doesn't take itself seriously, I think crypto summarizes it. Crypto doesn't take Superman seriously, like no one else in this movie. He cuts into some of the little seriousness that we have in the movie, like that final confrontation between Lex and Superman. I think the comedic tone of the movie is way too much for a Superman movie. I can see why crypto is put in the movie. It probably is a cute little addition for some. And I don't mind seeing crypto. He's in the comic books. He's an important character. He's a part of the family, a part of the Superman family. But he is like the main character in this movie if you look at it from certain perspectives. And I think the screen time spent on him is way too much, especially in a movie where there are so many characters and the plot has so many elements. And when the movie ends, you feel like those plots had more places to go. I mean, the movie starts 3 years after Superman reveals himself. So it kind of feels like it starts from the middle anyways. And honestly, that is a certain way to go. Sometimes people use flashbacks and stuff when entering from the middle of the story. That's the way to go. Sometimes they just, throughout the movie, give us reference to the past. I think this movie really doesn't do that. They just expect us to know who Superman is, which is fair enough, I guess. But I think what's really unacceptable is that in the very end, there is no fulfilling finish. There is no climax to the movie, and certainly many of the plots seem to be just dragging by the end, not really ending. And in a movie where there are so many little plots or characters that doesn't add anything to the movie, it really becomes an issue. There's a bit of good world building in the beginning of the movie with the written note saying 3,000 years ago the first metahumans were discovered. Probably that is related to the origin of Vandal Savage. And then about 30 years ago, Krypton was destroyed, Kal-El was sent to Earth, and 3 years ago, Superman revealed himself to the world. And we start the movie with Superman's first loss. I have some problems with this. Superman's first villains are traditionally characters like Metal or Parasite, which in their first encounter leaves Superman surprised. Because Superman is usually indestructible, and the first time he is faced with kryptonite, he fails. First time he encounters Parasite, he absorbs Superman's powers, leaving him defenseless. He also fails, and therefore he loses. And I'm not saying these are necessarily the first villains of Superman, like that wasn't the case, for example, in The Man of Steel. But my question is, what did Superman do in his first 3 years? Like, didn't he encounter any threats that can defeat him? I mean, obviously, there's probably no Zod, Brainiac, like those high-level supervillains that are matching Superman in multiple levels, including strength. But even entry-level villains that give trouble to Superman were either not there or they didn't present any challenge, which is a little weird. I think that's probably a bit of a missed opportunity, because I think before you present a villain that is strong enough to defeat Superman, like Ultraman here, probably introducing some characters that really bring out certain weaknesses of Superman allows us to understand the character, how he can be more witty and how he just doesn't rely on strength. But of course, that's just my opinion. So again, he loses for the first time. He loses pretty badly, and I think it was a strong start to the movie overall. I like when DC uses their own nations like Marvel did with Sokovia, or how DC in a series like Young Justice did it with Markovia, which is also in the comic books, obviously. So what they did here, I kind of liked. Tension in the Middle Eastern areas of the world and how USA is kind of manipulating that, especially with Lex Luthor here. I think that was a good way to start the plot. And the way Superman was defeated by Ultraman, I mean, I have my problems with Ultraman, but let's get into that a little later. Lex using Ultraman to defeat Superman remotely, I think that was a pretty creative way for Lex to fight Superman. In the first one third of the movie or so, we see Superman getting hit and hit. Physically, he loses his fortress of solitude. At the same time, what he relies on the most is his family, his Kryptonian family. The main reason why he says he's doing what he's doing, because his family sent him to be the protector of Earth. That whole idea is also broken down. So really breaking down Superman, showing him to be more emotional, showing him a little more deranged. So a little bit out of character, yes, but having that sort of a start, his first reaction to his first loss, it is acceptable, especially if you can end it with a certain character development that makes him rise above all of this. Then I think it would possibly be amazing. A problem with the movie is that in the end, Superman isn't really all that different. I don't really see him grow. I don't see him being a stronger Superman, physically or emotionally. I think he maybe shifts his ideas a little bit. Yes, from his Kryptonian heritage to his Earth parents. He kind of accepts that a little more, but overall, there's not much of a change. And I certainly don't really see changes in how people view Superman as well. Maybe the US government will now trust him a bit more, but we don't even see that happening fully. Like, for example, if all the nations in the world in the end of the movie said, yeah, Superman is accepted in our territory without question. He's not just an American citizen, he's a citizen of the world, so he's accepted here. If maybe something like that happened here, then the conflict in the beginning of the movie where Superman ends or prevents a war being an unacceptable thing, turning into an acceptable thing in the end, yeah, then that would probably be a certain change. But I don't think we see any of that. So all of that first loss, all of that breaking down of the character in the first third of the movie isn't all that effective. There are certainly some good scenes. I like the scenes at the Daily Planet. The overall vibes of the Daily Planet is given pretty accurately. It seems that Superman is giving interviews to Clark Kent regularly, and he is quoting himself. And we learned that Superman deciding to give an interview to Lois Lane is a bit of a surprise. She doesn't expect it. So that kind of makes me feel like maybe the first interview either never happened or Clark Kent was the one to conduct an interview, which is unusual. I wonder how Clark and Lois got close in the first place. Like maybe Clark started dating Lois, or maybe Superman started dating Lois and then Clark told the identity. We don't exactly have the details on that, which I think is a bit of a missed opportunity, as I tried to say before. But I guess maybe we'll learn about some of those details in the future. One of the first very important scenes in the movie, apart from the action, is Lois conducting the interview with Superman. They are dating at this point and never did interviews, so this interview is uncomfortable for Superman and he is very unprofessional. Usually when Superman conducts interviews with Lois Lane or anyone else, he can completely separate himself from the identity of Clark Kent, which again also tells me that this is probably his actual first interview with Lois Lane, because he's not prepared at all. Probably all the interviews he gave before were all in his head. He was just thinking of something and then saying, okay, Superman would say this, and then typing that down, which is also not good for me. Why is Superman so goofy and unable to control himself? How can he make the mistake of giving quotes to Lois as Clark? He knows he's being recorded. Another scene with a bunch of potential, Lois and Superman's first interview, but I just feel like we were not rewarded in any way. That scene only felt like showing Superman to be in a bad mental state, and the problem with that is we've never seen Superman in a good mental state. So from our perspective, this is who Superman is. This is who he has been for the last 30 years, which makes me think, did he have no type of character development in his first 30 years of Superman? And seeing him angry, defending himself, for saving people is absolutely what he would do, even in the interview. But losing his cool multiple times and thinking this is personal with Lois is not ideal. It could happen, but it's not ideal. And to be honest, if they resolved the issue in the future, this would be more acceptable. But this issue between Lois and Clark never resolves. They don't ever talk about the interview again. They don't necessarily change their opinions or views on the matter. So another unresolved plot in the very end. And what bugs me a lot in this scene, other than Superman not acting like Superman, is how seriously he takes social media. Nowadays, all the celebrities, I guess, do care about social media, but Superman is beyond that. And this is another general thing for me. I don't really love seeing smartphones, social media, and stuff like that in superhero movies. I know it's not the 40s, I know there's going to be technology, but when a plotline heavily relies on something like social media, I think you're losing that timeless aspect of the movie. Superman could be hurt by people's opinions. I mean, he has super hearing, right? And there are certain trigger words that let Superman hear people more clearly. Like if someone shouts Superman help, he would tend to hear that more. So imagine a scene in the beginning of the movie, he's flying, he's soaring above Metropolis, and everyone praises him, everyone loves him. And maybe when he loses, he starts hearing negative things. Like when his parents' recording come out, maybe then we can hear people saying, oh, I'm so afraid of Superman, oh, I don't know who this guy is, or is he gonna conquer Earth? And if he actually heard this with his super hearing, that would, first of all, be showing us cool superpower of Superman. Also, the plot wouldn't heavily rely on something like social media, which is just a cheap way of doing things. When I first saw Superman to be a bit more aggressive and maybe a bit more emotional and unable to control his emotions in the trailers, I thought maybe they're trying to go with the new 52 Superman style. He definitely is a bit more distant from the people in the new 52. He's more emotional, he's more cocky, and he's actually debuffed. Like, he's not as strong as the Superman we usually see. I thought maybe that was the way to go, but that Superman had the charisma and he had the leadership skills, and that Superman was more distant from the people, which kind of made him more like a god. And the reason why that happened was because he lost his parents at the age of 18. That's what caused him to be so distant from everyday life of humans. But here his parents are alive. He's optimistic, he's bright, right? He had a decent relationship with people. When he was losing a battle in the beginning of the movie, everyone was around him, trying to defend him. So certainly the reason why he would be more emotionally unstable or angry really doesn't apply here. I don't think you have the backstory or the foundation for that to happen. I mean, I criticized the movie a lot up till this point, but this all could have been saved if Superman had this big comeback. After his first loss, he could have came out as a totally grown character, and probably the steps for that should have been taken in the second part of the movie. In the second part, we see Superman's parents' recording is revealed by Lex Luthor to the world. Not only the people start fearing him or questioning him more, but we also see that the US government has to take action. And Superman acts on character when he wants to turn himself in. That's what Superman would do. He knows he's very powerful, he knows he can be scary, so he always has to cooperate. So he gives himself in. This is where we get introduced to the pocket dimension, which is a creative way for Lex to operate in the shadows. What I didn't like about Lex, which I can probably mention here, is that how much grudge he holds, especially towards unimportant people to him. Eve Tessmacher taking pictures all the time and revealing confidential information about all of his operations, and that being the only reason why Lex is outed, is another thing where I think movie just doesn't take itself seriously. It doesn't take its villain seriously. How can she be such a security risk of Lex's interdimensional operations? I was actually thinking a character like Engineer, who's been manipulated by Lex Luthor, could have been turned by Superman instead. Like, imagine a scene where Superman defeats the Engineer, but doesn't kill her obviously, showing he's not a threat and only wants the best for humanity. Then Engineer switches sides and gives Superman the info he needs on Lex. There were so many better ways to expose Lex, showing Lois as a great investigative reporter, or Superman winning over someone from Lex's team because of his humanity. That would have served the plot better. Lex is supposed to be smart and ruthless. The idea that a hot girl alone would defeat him is just dumb, and not something Lex would ever let happen. It really weakens his character. This is a good moment to catch up on Maxwell Lord's Justice Gang, and I'm happy that it's not called the Justice League because I think Superman should be the founding member of the Justice League. We don't know if it's gonna transform into the Justice League, but I liked seeing an established superhero group. I can also say at this point that Metamorpho's story is probably also one of the better parts of the movie. If you don't know Metamorpho's or Rex Mason's origin story, he was the bodyguard of Simon Stagg, which he hated but stayed on the job because he was involved with the daughter of Simon Stagg, Sapphire, love of Metamorpho's life. And when Simon Stagg learned about the relationship, he turns Rex Mason into Metamorpho after illegal testing. It is important to mention that Metamorpho can generate kryptonite in this movie. We learned that kryptonite is all but gone, and that's another thing. I wanted to mention, if Superman never lost a battle before, probably a kryptonite villain was not present. But then how can the whole kryptonite reservoir on the world be gone? Superman must have taken a precaution to get rid of all of it, so he must have faced it before. So how did he not lose? Against kryptonite, I mean. So all the kryptonite is gone as far as we know, but we see that Metamorpho can generate kryptonite. That is also inaccurate compared to the comics, because in the comic books, Metamorpho can create anything on the periodic table, but nothing extraterrestrial. Are there exceptions to that? Well, in Batman Superman World's Finest, we see that with certain enhancements, Metamorpho-powered Amazo is created that can generate the extraterrestrial. Can that be done surgically or like experimentally to the original Metamorpho? Sure. Should that have been explained better? For me, yes, because that is not an original Metamorpho power. But it was a clever way to imprison Superman. Inside Superman's cell, we see the food truck owner get murdered. It was sad to see a loyal fan of Superman murdered, but I don't think it hit me like it's supposed to. All the emotional scenes are either cut short so we cannot fully feel them, or their foundation is weak so we don't care. Ruining moments with comedy negatively contributes to this. There's no sun in the pocket dimension, so Superman doesn't gain his power until Metamorpho creates an artificial sun, which was also cool in the escape scene. I have certain problems with that scene. When Superman escapes and saves the baby, they are attacked by the soldiers of Lex Luthor. Superman defeats them without killing, which is what he's supposed to do, but we see that Metamorpho drowns the people after dropping them in the anti-proton river. Those guys must have died, and Superman was there, so maybe Superman didn't directly kill them, but he's supposed to save them. I think it would have been a nice addition if Superman swooped in and saved the guys, and then went to Metamorpho and said, yes, these are not good guys, but we cannot kill them. I mean, he shows many times in the movie how he is humane and wants to save people, but here he's unwillingly letting him die. And it's not even a concern for Superman after the fact. When Superman escapes, Lex's plans are altered, not necessarily ruined. We learn that he, of course, would like to have the benefit of owning half a country, but the real reason behind his plan is to actually get support of the US government to kill Superman. So he wants to make his murder of Superman legal. He just needs to lure him somewhere, and he does that by letting the pocket dimension get out of control and destroy the Earth. At this point, it is clear that Lex loses his cool. He's not the calculating, manipulative, and smart supervillain. He's just a deranged man with a lot of followers and resources and means. This is probably the weakest we see Lex Luthor. I know he hates Superman with a passion. I know he hates what he represents more than anything. But him losing his cool to this level, letting his pocket dimension eating away the world, I don't know, as a last resort, it's probably something Lex is capable of. But is this the thing to do it? You already know there was going to be an invasion of Jarhanpur. You know that Superman would always try to help people. He did it a couple of weeks ago now, so wouldn't he just be there? He could have just sent Ultraman and Engineer and ambushed them in Jarhanpur. So I don't know why he thought he had to destroy Metropolis. I mean, maybe I'm missing something here. But logically speaking, it's not that difficult to guess where Superman is going to be. We reach the final battle scene after this. Superman is lured to Metropolis and fights the engineer and Ultraman. This sequence is the strongest action sequence in the movie. One of the poor things that this movie does is to show us Superman's powers. Like I mentioned already, the super hearing could have been handled better. But we see a bit of freeze breath down in the pocket dimension, and here we see a very cool way that the laser eyes, the heat vision of Superman is used. He does a 360 turn to defeat all of Lex Luthor's soldiers. And then later on, when Ultraman is kicking the shit out of him and the engineer is trying to suffocate him, smart plan. That's why Superman defeating that plan is even better, because he proves his quick thinking and smarts. There's this brain versus brawn argument of Lex Luthor, and seeing Superman be clever is usually something that maybe not shown a lot. We see his optimism, we see his power, we see his humanity, but we rarely see his actual intelligence. And here we get to see that. He defeats the engineer pretty easily. Then we're again 1v1 versus Ultraman. There we get to see Krypto be an actual ally to Superman for a change, and he destroys the drones that Lex uses to view the fight. So there, you get rid of the drones, then Ultraman becomes this mindless drone without Lex's direction, and then Superman defeats him. We can talk about the major concern for me now, Ultraman. He is a clone of Superman, and that alone raises red flags. One of the issues in the comics has been that Lex can't clone Superman properly. He ends up with Bizarro, a failure, or Superboy, half human, half Kryptonian hybrid, since Lex has to mix his own DNA. Maybe in the future, Lex's tech could evolve to fully clone Superman, but 3 years is enough in the movies? That's hard to buy. It's not a deal breaker, just like Metamorpho's kryptonite isn't. But when the overall movie feels mediocre, all these small things become more questionable. If they just call him by a different name, I might have let it slide. But Ultraman is a loaded name. In DC lore, Ultraman is Superman's Earth 3 counterpart, an evil Superman. In this movie, you get to use the name Ultraman, but you give him none of the essence. When I first saw him in the black suit, full mask, I actually thought they were going to do the comic book version, where Yellow Sun weakens him and green kryptonite empowers him. I figured the suit was blocking the sun, maybe even infused with kryptonite tech to keep him powered. That would have been cool. You may ask, how could Lex capture such a powerful villain? Maybe he ended up trapped in the pocket dimension where there's no sun, and that's how Lex captured him, where he emerged into our Earth, hit by Yellow Sun, lost his powers. That could have been an interesting twist that incorporates the pocket dimension into the story more. Superman defeats everyone, and the Barovian invasion is stopped by the Justice Gang. There's a scene with the kid hoping Superman will come save him, but instead it's the Justice Gang who shows up. The idea seems to be that the Justice Gang was positively influenced by Superman, that his presence inspired them to step in. But was that actually earned in the movie? Was there a moment that emotionally justified it? Did we ever really see Superman affect them in a way that changed their mindsets or made them act for humanity? I don't necessarily think so. That moment could have been really powerful if it had more build-up, but instead it just feels like another rushed or underdeveloped plot point. After that, Lex is outed, the war is prevented, and he's taken to prison. There's another problem. Lex goes to Belle Reve. That doesn't make much sense. Belle Reve is a prison for metahumans mostly. Lex Luthor isn't a metahuman. He's a human villain who should either be sent to Stryker's Island, which is located in Metropolis, which is also where he usually ends up in the comics, or a specifically designed high security facility made for him. I get that James Gunn probably wanted to use the already established Belle Reve, but it is still inaccurate. Before we end the breakdown, I want to go back to when Clark goes to Kansas, to his home, to mention one of the flaws of the movie. Scenes in Smallville should have been more emotionally inspiring, and it should have probably been a bigger part of the plot. It was mostly used for Clark to recover physically and for him to get some emotional support from his parents, which was what he needed for sure. But do we, as the audience, feel that? Not necessarily. because one of the only emotional scenes that we get to see with his father is cut short, with his mom interrupting. The scene with Jonathan and Clark was one of the only scenes I felt emotional, but then it was ruined immediately. We also could have had more scenes with Lois and Clark in Smallville, which would have bridged the gap between their awkward conversation before Superman turned himself in and their big kissing scene in the end. I think a problem with the movie is that it really feels like it doesn't end. And one of the reasons is that it really doesn't have a climax. You could argue that the climax is when Ultraman is sucked into the black hole, or that it's the scene between Superman and Lex where they have their confrontation. But to be perfectly honest, Ultraman's demise isn't necessarily fulfilling, as he's just shown as a non-sentient like being. No one really cares when he's gone. Not even Superman cares. One of the best things about Man of Steel is when Superman kills Zod. He is devastated by it. It's something that he wished he had never done. Probably he never intends to kill anyone, but he was forced to do that, and he is destroyed under the emotional weight of his action and the people who died in the hours of fighting before it. That is a climax. In here, the action sequence ends without much of a high point. Then we see Lex Luthor and we have an interrupted conversation by Crypto. Another comedic break from a very much needed dialogue between Superman and Lex. So another potentially key moment ruined. Right after that, if Superman took Lex Luthor to Belle Reve himself, maybe then the scene would have been saved. We missed some dramatic shots from the movie, and this could have been it. In the final scenes of the movie, we see Superman in the Fortress of Solitude, reminiscing over his past with his adoptive parents. I don't like it when Jor-El and Lara are shown as villains of the story. I hope in the future that they can retcon this somehow. Maybe say, no, this message was actually altered, but it was such advanced technology, so we thought it was authentic. Jor-El is a man of science. He doesn't care about conquering people. There are a few positives from the ending that I can mention, which is the kiss between Lois and Superman. I think Superman and Lois Lane are the most iconic, important couple relationship from the comic books. Any superhero couple you look at, you get to see a lot of changes and breakups over the decades from different writers and times, except for Superman and Lois. Seeing that on screen is always special, and honestly, I think they had perfect chemistry, especially when the plot helped them. And their kissing in the end was passionate. It was a good scene. Even though their relationship problems aren't necessarily resolved, I think sharing their love regardless of their differences and seeing that was awesome. Those are probably all the scenes. The breakdown definitely allowed me to give all my thoughts, but as a quick summary, the movie has a solid core plot idea with Lex Luthor as the main villain, but I think it has problems with its execution. The story is convoluted, it has too many elements packed in it, and the important ones don't really get the attention they need. It usually undercuts serious or emotional moments with too much comedy, which makes Superman come off as a bit of a goofy and emotionally unstable figure, rather than an inspiring, charismatic figure that when he walks into a room, he just changes everyone. And honestly, it's mostly because it fails to take his main character, Superman, seriously, and that weakens everything around him, his impact, his relationships, and even story's overall themes. There are positives, like the visuals, they're stunning, and casting choices especially are amazing, but I think a few action scenes are up to the level of the visuals. We don't get to see Superman's powers fully explored, and therefore none of the action scenes are necessarily up to the level it needs to be. And the climax lacks emotional weight, and the ending feels incomplete, like the movie needed about 20-25 minutes to complete its overall plot. So in short, it's not the worst movie in the world, overall pretty mediocre, but for something to launch the DC universe, it's simply not good enough. Especially with the box office expectations, it probably won't be a financial success. It could be acceptable, but it definitely isn't going to be a massive hit. And overall, I'm hearing alright things about the movie, but I think when you really get into the details of the movie, you really start seeing the flaws, because the colors, the positive world building, the tone it tries to give, it feels like Superman, but when you go deeper, I think it's a mess of a movie. It is not a complete failure. I think there are aspects of the movie that can be brought from here to the future. What I have to say, I think someone who takes Superman more seriously should take over. James Gunn could still lead the DCU to a better tomorrow, but I don't think he should be actually doing the direction work of more serious characters like this. Superman needs a more serious tone. You may be saying, isn't that what the problem with the Man of Steel was? Honestly, overcorrection is never the answer. Going to the exact opposite side of the spectrum is not going to cut it either. There's a balance to it. There's a balance to everything. And I think that's something that James Gunn couldn't capture. For the future of Superman, I'd like to see a version who feels more stable, more charismatic, a true leader and inspiring figure who is deeply connected to Earth. I think that's what they were trying to show, that he's human, that he makes mistakes, but it didn't fully come across. Still, there's a foundation to build on. They can make the Superman better, and that's probably my biggest takeaway. There is hope. We'll see how James Gunn handles things moving forward. There are still a lot of great comic runs they can draw from. Honestly, a Batman-Superman movie where they're actually allies, not enemies, would be exactly what this universe needs right now. There's already a solid setup. We got the Justice Gang, the Suicide Squad, the Middle Eastern conflict shown in this movie, and Creature Commandos. The Hall of Justice looks amazing, I'm glad they included it, and the Justice Society photo in there hints at a deeper history. Bringing Batman fully into this world instead of keeping him isolated in Gotham could open up some great storytelling. Mark Waid and Dan Mora's story from recent years would really be a good way to continue. I'd love to see them adopt World's Finest, a story that introduces Batman and Superman as equals, feeling each other out, learning to trust and respect one another, because even though they have different methods, they want the same for the world, a world of hope and justice. Introduction of Wonder Woman in the Trinity's first adventure can also be done here. As for Superman specifically, there are still plenty of great characters and villains that they can bring in, and Brainiac would be the perfect next step. Brainiac is such a rich, layered villain with tons of story potential. And he's never been used in live-action movies, which would make his debut in the DCU feel fresh. There are so many great Brainiac stories to pull from, like Jeff Jones' Action Comics run, or his major role in the New 52, or how the DCAU and Smallville handled him by connecting his origin to Krypton. He is a Justice League level threat, which means you could scale it up a little bigger into the DCU storyline with Superman leading the heroes. Brainiac is absolutely the right villain to use next. This is my overall review, breakdown, and discussing the potential future of Superman in the DCU. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to point out here that all the criticism I have of the movie is because I love Superman. I want its content to be perfect. I didn't hate the movie, but I found it disappointing and wanted to point out how it could have improved. You must have a lot of thoughts and opinions about this too, so if you could share that in the comment section, that would be awesome. And you can also let me know about your plans for the future of the DCU as well. Until next time, be bros out.